Okay, I'll podcast this section too, just for a couple of people that are away. Look, I read that as a fairly straightforward prompt in terms of, I actually do agree with that. I think that was my initial reading of the text. The swimming is a coping mechanism, but in effect, what it does is it allows him to escape rather than face and confront those issues. And so what we see at the end of the text is the problem of not facing the issues, not addressing the fact that there's a snake is, an extended metaphor in a sense for him not addressing directly the fact that he's being indicted and his family's falling apart and all these sort of things. The camphor laurels, we talked about those the other day. How do they communicate his desire for control but lack of awareness of his reality? Well, obviously they create the perception for his neighbours that he's a foreigner, either in the sense of he's not a farmer, but they also, for him, they represent that connection to his childhood, that escaping into the past, that escaping from where he is, not realising the problems that they cause for him, and rather focusing on the comfort that they give. Leon Kay's desire for a dream of an orchard, it should say. That should say orchard, I don't know why it says orchid. Leon Kay's desire for a dream of an orchard to the reality of his life now. So we talked about that the other day, this image of having these beautiful breakfasts of lush fruit and then the fruit rotting on the vines, on the trees. How does that expose, what does that comparison look like? I was just answered that. We talked about the encounter with the old hippie in the street, and giving us a sense that he's an outsider and quite isolated, and he doesn't really understand that isolation. He feels like he should be appreciated because, like all of them, he's come from humble beginnings. His family being factory workers and all that sort of stuff, his dad working 2 jobs. But it just shows you that he doesn't fit in this place, and he's never going to be accepted in this place. And it doesn't matter what his story is, he's being judged. And he needs to accept that and deal with that, rather than trying to confront it. Because he can't reason with that old guy. He can't reason with him. He can't talk to him. There's already perception. And okay, the guy's slightly crazy, but then if you look at all of the rest of the community that look on and support Sonny, which is the old hippie's name, rather than Leon, that gives us that indication that the country is not an escape for him. It's just a continuation of that. Perhaps the reason for the persecution is different in the country. It's less direct against his actions. It's more about who he is rather than what he's done. We have that city wanker sort of comment, or the yuppie, sort of comment. And that's not about his crimes. It's more about the fact that he just doesn't belong there, and he's trying to belong there when he shouldn't. Leon Kay learns that he's probably going to, on Patreon, this is stuff that we didn't look at in class together, but remember he's told that he's going to have to do jail time, and he didn't think he was going to have to do jail time. And then he finds the snake. How are those two things connected? Anyone want to have a stab at that based on their reading?
Well, the snake's not an issue in the book that you can't ignore, and like the prison sentence, it's another issue that he's trying to ignore but can't.
Yeah, because it's now right in front of him. It's no longer being put off by endless adjournments and postponements of the trial. He's now dealing with it. He has to deal with it. Any other ideas? And he has to deal with the snake because he wants to swim in the pool. Any other ideas? Look at the wording of the question. How is the snake... that's the next question. How are the two events related? So what have the snake and perhaps Leon got in common? They're both trapped. Yep. And they need someone else to get them out. They're in a situation where it's going to ultimately probably really harm them. A snake trapped in a pool that can't get out, ultimately it's going to drown. because it can swim for so long as it keeps moving, but the second it stops moving, it sinks. Yeah? So, any other connections? What does the snake in the pool mean to Leon? What can't he do?
Swim.
Yeah, he can't swim, and what does the swimming represent?
His escape.
His escape. So the snake is this impost on his sense of control over his life. Like the prison sentence is going to be this confinement. I mean, in a literal sense, a very confining experience. Okay. So then we've talked about how they're related, but how are they the opposite? If you look at the description of the snake on page 24-25, how is the snake described there? Yep.
There's one quote where it says it looks so natural, so perfectly at home. It was at home, which is completely opposite to him.
Yep. So yeah, the natural nature of it, the sense that it's at home, the sense that it's managing even in this fairly difficult and foreign environment to it is okay. It's also quite graceful and fluid, and that's the opposite to him as well. What's it trying to do? I mean, the sentence, you know, the snake was so commanding of its environment, it was like a mockery of itself, a wildlife park souvenir, a plastic toy. You know, so the sense that it's, you know, a master of its domain is completely the opposite of what he is. But what's it trying to do in terms of the situation it's found itself in? Is it happy in the pool? And particularly if you look at page 34 and 35, which is the very end of the story, what does it eventually do? On 34 and 35. Desperate to escape the pool, the red-bellied blackstake, longer and sleeker than the original, or maybe this was the original, slid up his torso, rode his panicking body to the edge and escaped into the palms. So the snake in this instance is actually, it's doing something. In both instances, although it's clear in that second set of questions, it's doing something to try and escape the pool. Is Leon doing something to try and escape his environment or his scenario? It's largely just ignoring it. Yeah? So in some sense, they're the same, but the snake's behaviour is actually very different. In the way that it's either managing the situation it's found itself in, or in the way that it's trying to escape the situation, the unpleasant situation it's found itself in. Now, escape in the case of the snake is a positive thing, because it's dealing with the problem. Escape in Leon's case is not a positive thing because it's ignoring the problem. So just be a bit careful with that connection. You had a question?
I was just going to say, there's a quote that said who was waiting at him. I thought that was kind of important because it showed that Leon was waiting for the situation to pass, whereas the snake was waiting on him to...
Because he's, in a sense, an opportunity to get out. Yeah? Cool. So that's sort of looking at question 6. Questions 7, 8, and 9 are more about the next section. So we'll just think about them ahead of time. What is Leon K's interaction with China Mason suggesting? What function does she serve? What does she expose about him through their interaction? Why does Leon K call China Mason when bitten? Moreover, why does he ask her such an unclear question and apologise? I don't necessarily have an answer for that. I'm interested to see what you think. And how does the story and its central character explore the metaphor of the rip that's established more largely in the text? I'll just update my little search perhaps don't get a text message saying
I signed in.
Sorry?
I signed in.
Oh, did you?
Yeah.
Okay. So, the podcast that I'll do today, I'll just add to the bottom here. So there'll be 2 of these underneath each other. Okay, just so if you're doing work on this in the holidays, if you're going back over the views and values work in the textbook, there'll be this there to support you, as well as obviously your annotation if you need to go back over stuff. But it's mainly for the people that are away. This jacket is a lot hotter than I thought it would be. That's why Chewie doesn't need anything on Hoth. He's okay, isn't he? No one's as into it as me, clearly. Okay, so we're up to page 27, and we'll just continue, and we'll move a little bit more quickly through this section than we did for the first 15 or so pages that we did together, and hopefully we'll have some time to come back to those last 3 questions. I'll pop those up on the screen to keep us in check. Now I'm cold. Okay, so we're at the section break on page 27. How did you go, by the way, with the annotation of the interceding passages, all right? Did you have any questions about anything that you read or anything that you noticed that you thought it meant something but you weren't quite sure what, or, any issues with any of that reading? All good? Okay, yep. So the first part of the text, first part of the story, and really the last part is probably the more challenging. So the middle bit is not as densely packed, apart from that description of the snake and stuff like that. He was drinking his breakfast coffee at 7:30, on edge at missing yet another swim. The third lap session, the snake had cost him. Notice that he's drinking coffee rather than his pot of green tea. Yeah, so, which is what he's described as doing earlier in the text. He drinks a pot of green tea each day and does the Sudoku. He's drinking coffee, so stimulant, something to take that edge off his nerves. When the wildlife saviour arrived. Now, obviously that's the name of the company. We're told that in the previous section. But obviously the use of the word saviour is, I think, quite deliberate. He's named the company, Drew has chosen that name for that company quite purposefully, and I'm sure you can work that out. For some reason, he expected a man in khakis and boots, not a young woman wearing jeans and a green t-shirt with a baby in a carry cot. The sunlight emphasised the shine of a wide scar on her right cheek. Her straight hair fell behind her little dark water. Oh, sorry. I don't know why I read that like that. Her straight hair fell behind her like dark water. You haven't injured the snake, have you? She frowned at him. Some men can't help it. They're on a sacred mission to bash snakes to death. I haven't harmed it. Seeing him glance at the sleeping baby, the young woman said, "We're all volunteers. We have to fit in with wildlife rescue. We have to fit in the wildlife rescue with our normal lives." She sat down the carry cot on the veranda. Everyone's sorry for the cuddly things when they're hurt or in trouble, but snakes are just as much part of the big picture as koalas and wallabies. Why is he so surprised at the person that arrives? Why was he expecting a man in khakis and big boots? Why do you think? He hasn't interacted with a woman for a long time. Yeah. Why else? Who's he thinking of? Why is he thinking of a big man in khakis and boots being someone that's going to solve his problem? Perhaps it's more indicative of the sort of person that he believes commands and controls this sort of environment. It's very different to the sort of person that he is. This city chap who's working in an office compared to the woodsman, sort of image. What's China Mason's immediate judgment of him? Some men can't help it, they're on a sacred mission to bash snakes to death. What's her judgment? What does she think of men? Yeah, she's not a big fan of the male gender. So, and we can work out, sort of backwards engineer perhaps her backstory as we get to know her a little bit more and understand why that might be. She introduced herself as China Mason. He was pleased His name seemed to mean nothing to her. Indicating the pool, he said, "There's my problem." The snake was noticeably more faded and listless this morning. It obviously hadn't eaten for a while. As well as losing sheen and energy, its body seemed to have contracted. "It's stressed and exhausted," said China Mason, fitting a meshed metal trap to an aluminium pole. So is the snake becoming a bit more like him? Stressed and exhausted. It's losing its sheen. It's listless. It's faded. You know, I think those are all words that we could definitely use to describe Leon. She opened and shut the trap from the latch on the handle. Bending over the pool, revealing a tattoo of a lyrebird low on her right hip, she took only about 20 seconds to scoop up the snake from the pool and snap the trap shut. Perhaps another minute to detach the trap from the pole and place it into the back of the van. "We released them out in the bush," she told him. "But if you want, I could let it go in your garden. It's home territory after all." "No, my snake sympathy only goes so far." His gratitude was almost boundless. However, as he served her coffee on the veranda, he found himself talking and listening more enthusiastically than he had to anyone for many months. What's the difference there? How does he usually relate to people that have come to visit?
Quite hostile.
Sorry?
Quite hostile.
Yeah, very hostile. He sees anyone that comes to visit, which really the only person we know of is Gareth Witherall. But we get the suggestion by, the way he sort of feels about other cars on the road and all those sorts of things, that he's actually really wanting to be isolated. He doesn't want to have any interaction with anyone else who's around. And so it's odd that he makes this connection with China. Why do you think he makes that connection? Why do you think he makes that connection? Why do you think he wants to talk to her? Why do you think, as is described there, he... sorry, I've just lost the space. He's more enthusiastic than he had been for many months. Why is that?
She didn't even know his name when he introduced himself.
Yeah,
So,
that's a big part of it, isn't it? That she doesn't connect the name to the scandal, so she's just viewing him like another person. Why else do you think? Any other reasons?
She sort of solved a problem for her.
Yeah. He hasn't met many people that have solved problems, has he? He's met people that have presented him with problems. Even the lawyer who's meant to be the person advocating for him, really is just going through the motions because it's a hopeless case. In the beginning, the conversation was of snakes, of course. Blacks, eastern browns, tigers, adders, pythons. She repeated her mantra about snakes deserving the same respect as furry marsupials. For a venomous snake, that one in the trap is relatively timid. It attacks humans only as a last resort. His interest in the topic surprised him, as did the novel sound of his own animated voice. So notice that he's become almost more energetic in her presence. All this unaccustomed chatting to a woman was making his throat dry, and when the baby woke and started to yelp like some small bush animal itself, and China Mason said, "Do you mind if I feed her?" his answer, "Of course not," came out as a croak. An unanticipated bare breast was a shock. Although he politely averted his eyes when she lifted up her t-shirt, not the least self-consciously, and applied the baby to her nipple, its effect was to make him stand up and offer more coffee. "Thank you," she said, smiling slightly. "She's Aisha, by the way. Sounds like the continent, but spelled differently. Maybe I should just quit." Keeping up the China connection, he supposed. He felt a little dazed, returning with the coffee. Still a little giddy, but anxious not to show it. He asked whether her parents had named her China because of their admiration for the country and Chinese things. "No, they named me Janelle." When she was small, she explained her father liked to call her China, as in rhyming slang. China plate, mate. Yeah, that's how that rhyming slang works. Because she always hung around him. his little pal and helper. Then, when I was 9, he went out for cigarettes, just like in a film, and never came back. Leon K's first instinct was to pat her on the arm or shoulder, at least register his sympathy by meeting her steady gaze with his own. But the overt breast handling, the sudden switching from sides, both nipples simultaneously visible for a moment, then the replacement of the first breast inside the t-shirt and the complete exposure of the second one for Aisha's benefit hampered any such response. Why is he so uncomfortable? It seems a pretty obvious question, doesn't it? Yeah, but not everyone's. And it's hard. I guess it's a bit hard to imagine. But once you've had kids, and my wife breastfed, and you're just used to seeing that happen, it's not a big deal. Yeah, boobs just aren't that interesting. And so it's not a big deal, and he's had kids, so you would assume, I read it as an assumption that there's something else going on to make him more uncomfortable than normal here. What do you think that might be?
He's attracted to her.
Yeah, there's a discomfort because there's a sexual attraction, and this isn't the breastfeeding thing is not a sexual activity. Seeing her breasts in that moment should not be sexually arousing. That's not how that works. Yeah, but he is uncomfortable because perhaps he is feeling that way, and that's making him uncomfortable. What do you think about that? The desire to console her over the absent father. Where is that coming from?
Because he does care.
Yeah, he does care. It's not. It's a little bit paternal though. The patting the shoulder or touching the arm. It's a bit like what a father would do to an upset child, more than adult equals. And so, I think that adds to that discomfort. That perhaps he doesn't see her as a potential partner, but perhaps someone to care for, but at the same time being sort of sexually aroused, yeah? So there's quite confusing, I think for him, quite confusing things going on. I mean, he hasn't seen a woman for so long, he hasn't interacted with anyone for so long, and there's lots of things coming up because of that.
I'm not too sure if this is right or not, but do you think maybe his sympathy for her is for her dad leaving is because that's kind of what's happened to his kids?
Yeah, I think that could be the case too. So, and that would strengthen that paternal connection to her rather than the sort of adult equals. Yeah, so he's seeing his own daughters and the effect that his absence will have on them. Because remember, not only is he absent from them now, but he's going to continue to be absent from them when he goes into prison. And then that's going to potentially strengthen the separation that he's already experiencing in his family. Here and then there. Yeah, sure.
I was also thinking with the sexual arousal towards China is he's been convincing himself for so long that he's still with his wife.
Yep. Yeah, that could definitely be going on.
With the fact that she can't handle him anymore.
Yeah, and perhaps suddenly feeling some sort of connection to another woman makes him realise that the connection with his wife is no longer there.
One can't hold on to it.
Yeah. Good. So it's quite, there's lots of possibilities there. I don't know which ones, I'm not going to discount any of them. But they could all be going on, is the reality of that. So it's, the contrast for me is the second that China is there, suddenly there's actually things going on for Leon K. There's emotional connection, there's mental stimulus, there's sexual energy. All of these things have been completely absent from his life, either willingly or just by coincidence because of the scenario he's found himself in. And so, that's quite interesting because he's been avoiding that. Now he's confronted with it, and she's done in 2 minutes with the snake. He could have just said, thanks for that, see you later. But she sticks around, and that's at his invitation with the continued offers of coffee. We continue. Where am I up to? Oh yeah, for a while there was a lot of fleshy bustling and bouncing going on, and of course no touch was possible. The breast dominated the veranda, the way they introduced intimacy, presumed it, and at the same time forbade it. So there's that complex. The intimacy he's talking about is more familiarity. She's comfortable. But then it also has a dual meaning. It has a subtext, doesn't it, in terms of sexual intimacy, and the narration alludes to that. The same time forbade it. There's some sort of, it creates a barrier because of the way he responds. Anyway, she was a stranger. For God's sake, he'd known her less than an hour. But despite himself, he felt a sunburst of lust, instantly overshadowed by guilt. So you can see that duality going on for him. You were supposed to be favourably inclined towards the naturalness of nursing mothers, yet always remained sexually detached. But he felt swamped by intense sensations, conflicted on several levels, and basically, like a pimply 14-year-old again, something in his being had shifted. He tried to focus on her scar. Why is the scar the thing he chooses to focus on?
It's a measure of her vulnerability.
Yep, good. And it's all, he's in his mind, this sudden sort of introduction of this woman, who's, apart from the scar, described very positively. The scar is the crack in the foundation of that idyllic image. Yeah. So he's focusing on that because it removes that sort of fantasy element around her. Dad was good with animals, China Mason said, very calmly, as she burped the baby on her shoulder. Kind, not the shooting sort, not even rabbits. He could handle reptiles, no worries. He could get possums out of the ceiling without a scratch on him. 10 years later, she went on, she was working behind the bar in Newcastle Hotel when he walked in. That was a shock. He saw me, too, downed his beer and walked out. I didn't run after him. If that was his attitude, bugger him. I think the relationship she has with her father is really important as a parallel for Leon's relationship with his own children, because the strength of the connection that she describes up until the moment when he leaves, the fact that she's paralleling his, comfort with animals and stuff like that, and then to turn and go, look, I had a chance to reunite with him and reconnect, but neither of us took it because we both moved on, is in a sense what Leon fears. Phew, genuinely moved. He was still trying to meet her eyes and succeeded. At least I inherited the animal thing from him, said China Mason, the lifelong interest. Yes. I see you're wondering about my scar. Not at all, he lied. Acid, she said. Oh. His unasked question hung burning in the air. She didn't elaborate, but finished the breastfeeding then. What passion must she have aroused to cause the acid attack? And what sort of jealous, evil bastard would do that to her? To Leon Kay, the time it took her to adjust her clothing, burp the baby again and place her in the carry cot flew by incredibly fast. His brain raced with possible delaying tactics, but he could hardly offer her a drink this early in the morning or round up more suffering wildlife. Aisha doesn't much resemble me, does she? She remarked absently. All that blonde hair, she takes after my ex-partner. Why is this woman being so, so open and connected with him? I mean, the narration through his eyes is telling us that he's delaying, he's wanting her to be there. For some reason, her presence gives him comfort and connects him to life in a way that he hasn't been connected to life for so long. But why is she also sort of so casual and friendly when everyone else in this community seems to despise him?
It's probably the same experience for her.
Yeah, maybe she's been isolated because of her very alternative sort of nature. Maybe the scar as well has isolated her.
Further remark takes after my ex-partner, maybe she's lonely.
Yeah, maybe she's lonely too. Maybe she's had some sort of trauma like he's had, but as in he's had trauma and she's had trauma. They're obviously very different, but maybe she's been that little bit isolated too.
Possibly she just experience another piece of the wildlife.
Yeah, another wounded animal to care for. Yeah, good. I think they're both very, very possible. Where am I? Why did he feel elated at that little prefix, the simple X, and at her bringing it to his attention? His gratitude extended far beyond her ridding him of the snake. It reached far out. It stretched all the distance over different years and landscapes to the scar on her cheek. She was becoming more attractive and mysterious by the second, the scar adding vulnerability to her sensual intrigue. Not to mention the lyrebird tattoo on her hip and her little dark I did it again. And her hair like dark cascading water. Everyone's losing respect for me. Any respect that you have has just disappeared with my terrible reading today. It dawned on him suddenly that he could easily embarrass her and himself with an inappropriate outpouring of enthusiasm, with wild compliments and avid interest. She'd think him mad and creepy. Actually, he did wonder if he'd become completely stir-crazy lately, and he was glad it was too early in the day for him to be anything but sober. Really, he should watch himself in company, especially in female company. He walked her sensibly to her van. There was a danger his feelings might show in his tight facial expression. He realised his emotions were in a precarious state, but he still had some self-restraint and dignity left. And all he ended up saying to her was, "How much do I owe you?" She gave him her card, as well as her name and contact number. It said, "We volunteers gratefully accept what you think is a reasonable donation towards saving our wildlife." Her eyes widened at the reckless cheque he pressed into her hands, an amount certain to perplex the investigative auditors in days to come. "Seriously, are you sure? Wow, thank you." She sounded like a teenager, just handed prize concert tickets. "Call us if you have any more creature problems," said China Mason, wildlife saviour, tooting the horn and waving blithely as she drove off through the tunnel of camphor laurels and down the driveway. Now, I heard the scratch of highlighters. What did we highlight there? Yep, so we've always had her as China Mason, but now we've got her title as well. Why has it been added in here?
He's trying to disengage from that emotional level,
Perhaps, so it could be there because the occupation, he's putting it there if it's focalised through the... So remember that we've got a third person narrator, but we get the narration focalised. It's a technical sort of term. Focalised through that main character, the protagonist, Leon Kay. So if it's focalised, if you believe this narration here is very closely focalised through Leon Kay and not distant in that third person objective position, then it could be him trying to distance himself from her in that protective mode. What are the other possibilities? What if it's more objective narration and it's not focalised through him? Why is it included?
I was just thinking because wildlife saviour meant to say that he is the wildlife, like he is the connection
Yeah.
between him and the snake.
And that would be the interpretation I would take if I felt like the narration there was more objective. So it wasn't through his eyes, if it was more from that third person point of view, distant view. And I think my reading of the narration here is that we have stepped back a little bit. Just a little bit though. So it could be that he also perceives her as having saved him to some extent. Oh wow, I love being near the middle school students in this room. That's magic. Their energy is so fucking irritating. Anyway, I'm recording that. I don't know how to edit these files. Okay, and we'll just have to go on then. Where am I up to? Why does he give her so much money? Because it's her reaction tells us it's a lot of money. He's been so tight with his money, so frugal because he has to be. Why does he give her so much money? What does it tell us?
He's really attracted to her and he thinks she's invaluable. Like,
Yep,
He feels like he owes her a lot.
owes her a lot. It's a sign of his attraction, it's a sign of her value.
He's overcompensating for his lack of promotions.
Yep. There's a darker reason as well. No, I don't mean he's paying for services or anything like that. It's more about his sense of his future. Does it matter if the auditors come after him now? He's already going to prison.
I didn't see that. That realization.
Yeah.
He's already going to prison. It doesn't matter if he gives her, $10,000. What are they going to do? Going to prison is bad enough as it is. If he goes there for another week because he gave away too much money, it doesn't really matter. If they sell, some of his property to pay off that debt, it doesn't really matter. He's lost everything already anyway. And so, in a sense, it's a desperation and a last-ditch effort for connection that he feels like he's probably going to lose. So I think all of those things are going on at once. But I think if you think about that darker reason, that more ominous reason, actually the next part of the text becomes a little bit easier to grapple with. For perhaps half an hour, Leon Kay sat in a patch of sun on the veranda steps, considering a cloud of gnats hanging over the pool, vibrating thousands of tiny wings beating in unison. Beyond the tiers of camphor laurels and over the cane fields, a thin stripe of sea stretched in a north-south rectangle between the headlands. The vista of parallel pale blues and greens was like the flag of some temperate northern country. Birds called, the filter box lid tap-tapped, and eventually the hovering gnat mass moved on. What's the idea of all of this very natural imagery now? Is it a little bit more like that blanket of nature that we get at the start being pulled back over him? Because that's where he's comfortable. So he was able to swim again. But with the obstacle removed, there seemed to be less urgency. Eventually, he stood anyway, stepped out of his clothes and walked to the pool, swinging his arms to loosen up after the enforced layoff. He dived in, turned on his back underwater and began stroking. Striving to appreciate the streaming clouds as usual, the skittering swifts, the pelican soaring high today over the cane fields. He swam one lap, two. It took 3 laps before the waves and backwash from his progress agitated the filter box enough for the snake to curl out from the airspace between the filter and the pool's surface. What's that? Why do we get it sort of described in that way? Are we, I know that we've read it already, but do we think that, is this a surprise? Because the snake's been captured and then suddenly, Drew takes us on quite a bit of a roller coaster here because we think, oh wow, he's made this connection, he's had his problem solved, but having the problem solved is actually not a great thing for him because it means that he can escape back into this sort of, cocoon of ignorance, and he's never going to see China again. Perhaps this gives him a reason to get her back, but he's in the pool as well. There's quite a lot of tension going on there. Desperate to escape the pool, the red belly black, longer and sleeker than the original, or maybe it was the original, slid up his torso, rode his panicking body to the edge, and escaped into the palms. As China Mason had pointed out, black snakes, though venomous, are relatively timid. A measure of its anxiety was that it bit Leon Kay's neck on its way to freedom. Has anyone ever seen a red-bellied black snake? Yeah? You see one in person? You seen it yet? I nearly stood on one on U12 Exia a number of years ago. We were on a bike ride. And you'll do it next year. So we're at the top of this place called Tower Hill, and I was knackered, and I was walking my bike up the hill, and everyone else was much fitter than me had ridden up, and I thought, oh, there's a bit of bark, and I went to stand on it, and it slid out under my foot. And I'd been teaching this text only a few weeks earlier, and it freaked me out, because I know they're very poisonous, they're very venomous. Not poisonous, venomous. And it's intimidating to come across. If you haven't come across a snake in real life, in the wild, it's actually quite frightening. I think it's quite scary. My mum lives in this area where this, is set, and she's got a pool. And I've only been to her place once, but it was a very, very hot day. She's like, oh, would you like to have a swim? We've cleaned the pool, there's no frogs or anything. And I'm like, no way in hell am I getting in that pool, because I could see the filter blocks flapping and tapping away, and I'm like, I'm not going out the way Leon K went out. No way, no. So yeah, I think there's a very primal fear in that's being tapped into in this story. This fear of snakes is very, unless you live in Ireland and there's no snakes, but we're very attuned to St. Patrick drove all the snakes out of Ireland. Didn't you know that? Yeah. We're very attuned to nature and our fear of these things. And if you think about the more symbolic connection of snakes and our fear of snakes, it's a fear of temptation, because the snake is the tempter in the Garden of Eden. It's the creature that leads to Adam and Eve being expelled from paradise. And so if you take that symbolic meaning that is, regardless of whether you're religious or not, most people know about that aspect of that story and that faith. We can take that in a Christian society, which Australia is, and layer that onto this snake here as well. Because there is salvation offered through the snake. There's temptation offered through the snake in the presence of China Mason. But at the same time, it's the reason why he is expelled from his pool, which is paradise. It's the thing that stops him from swimming, which is his Eden. But it's also the thing that brings him great suffering in terms of his death. Yeah? So there's quite a useful connection there. You can take the image of the snake, which we've already paralleled to Leon, we've already paralleled to his struggle, but we've also used as a contrast. We can take it even further by making that connection. Yeah. Desperate to us, we've done that one. He got inside to the telephone, even found her wildlife saviour's card in his trouser pocket. Her number rang and rang, but finally she answered. Water was puddling the carpet, and a thin stream of watered blood dripped pink from his neck and down his chest. Already his throat was constricting. Finally she answered. What do I do now? Leon K asked her, repeatedly. Why has repeatedly made one sentence all of its own? What's the effect?
It's going to be manic and
Very panicked. Short sentences increase the speed of reading, so we get the manic sort of reaction there. The other thing, if he repeatedly said, what do I do now? It doesn't have the same sense. Like, you actually, by isolating the word repeated in that sentence on its own, we get it being said first, but then we get the repetition after, so we get the sense that it's coming bang, bang, bang like that. What do I do now? So we get the literal repetition of the question. He pictured her face. His voice was dry and already disappearing, so he had to hurry. I'm sorry, he apologised. I'm not from here. What's the purpose of the question? This is question 8. What is the purpose of the question? What's he asking? What do I do now? Is he asking, what should I do to prevent myself from dying from this snake bite? Is that what his question means?
Maybe it's relating back to the Garden of Eden, like after the whole snake bite and everything. he realizes that like it's like he's not too sure what's to come next. Or
Yeah. Because
consequence.
you're going out of paradise and into the wastelands, yeah? So he's realising that he's about to die, perhaps, because you've got that description of the throat tightening and the voice going and the mouth going dry and all this sort of stuff. And, you know, if a snake bites you on the neck, there's very little you can do, because has everyone done first aid and how to treat a snake bite? You've got to get it lower than your heart, yeah? So how do you get your neck lower than your heart? Because even if you lie down, you're still only level. So the idea is that if the blood doesn't have to pump up, it's not going to work so hard and it's not going to spread the venom through that system as quickly. So you're pretty much stuffed if you get bitten above heart level. If you get bitten in the ankle, best case scenario. Yeah. But a red-bellied black snake is incredibly venomous. And so unless you get almost immediate attention, immediate airlift to a hospital, you're really, really going to struggle to survive. So he probably knows that. Because they've talked about snakes that afternoon. They've talked about the snake that she's captured. So he knows that. So what's the question? What do I do now? Is he asking, you know, should I put a tourniquet on? Should I cut it and suck it out, which you can't do because it's on his neck? You shouldn't do that anyway. You know, what's he actually asking about? Perhaps it's what happens to me now. But it's the statement, it's the apology at the end that's, I think, the most confusing. What does that mean? I don't know. What do you think it means? Yep.
He still feels like an outsider. He feels like he's never, and whether that's because of his like European background, but he feels like he's never fit in.
Yep, and is that perhaps the reason why he didn't think to check for another snake, or he doesn't know what is going to happen to him because of the snake bite? That just reaffirms the idea that he's an outsider, perhaps? Good. Why is he apologising to her for that, though?
Because she sort of was the one that saved him. If we're going back to that comparison of him being the snake, she saved him and he said nothing to save himself. He
Yeah.
didn't try it or
Yeah,
anything.
so
She
that's
tried.
nice. Maybe he's apologising for not making the effort himself to continue being saved. Yeah, good. I mean, that's a very strong comment by Drew. If he's apologising for not making any effort to save himself, that's a very strong warning, isn't it? In the moment before his death, he realises that he should have done more to save himself. That's Drew saying, don't be like Leon. Because even Leon knows he shouldn't be like Leon. Yeah. Other comments?
I think it's important because usually he's trying to do he can to fit in, and this is the first time he's acknowledged really that he's not really part of it right now.
Yeah, it's actually the only time in the text that he faces up to his, actively faces up to his isolation and his difference rather than trying to not be different. It's really the only time in the story that he's honest, other than in terms of an interaction, other than perhaps the internal exploration through the narrator. Though we never get him saying that. We only ever get the narrator perhaps perceiving that. And remember that narrator is not him; it's sort of a third person. So there's this moment of stark truth. Almost very confronting truth in that admission and that apology. Good. Is there any other thoughts there? I'm happy with that, but is there anything else that anyone can see? No? Okay, let's deal with that last question. How does the story and its central character or any of the imagery sort of, set up the metaphor of the rip? Because this is the first story in this collection. And so its function as the first story in the collection is really to establish one of the core ideas, which is this metaphor that sometimes in life things happen. They change the direction of our lives in a way that we did not predict. That is immense and powerful. And it's how we react to them that is interesting and different. How does it establish that metaphor?
Well, Leon Kay's kind of been swept up by the rip. He's been taken.
Yep.
This thing has happened. Now he's going out. But the thing that he didn't do was he didn't swim back in Austin parallel to the rip. He was
Yep.
sure to be able to get back.
He didn't do anything. He just ignored that he was being swept away. Yeah. So that's a problem. Yeah. Any other connections?
I was thinking it relates back to Gatsby, how they're both the characters who are warned, but they don't take the warning, so they die by that pool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, they both die in a pool, don't they? So, strong connection to Gatsby. Yeah. Any other ideas? And I like the idea that there's a warning. There's actually a moment where, he can have sort of an awareness of the peril that he's in, whether it be the snake or whether it be, the lawyer telling him he's really got no hope and he's not admitting his fault, whether it be the community telling him that he's not welcome or doesn't belong there and he ignores that, all of those sorts of things, just things that he ignores that's foolish, Can't escape the future? Well, of course you can. Would be the variant for me from Gatsby.
Oh, because they're both trying to live an idealistic life that isn't
Yeah. Cool. Okay. We've got about half an hour, and it might be worthwhile at this point, actually, I might cut this out of the program and give us some additional time to talk about the text when we come back. We'll actually just listen to Robert Drew talk about his texts, because there's a couple of little interviews and stuff. So I'll just give me a second to find them, because I had